Hello, welcome to Pathways Youth and Family Services Training on Human Trafficking. This is an annual training required for all Pathways Youth and Family Services foster, adoptive parents, and employees. Please make sure that you're following along on your test. Remember, it is one test per person. Once at the conclusion of this training, you will turn that test into your Pathways Family Specialist, where they will score it, add a certificate to it, and give you the amount of hours credit for this training. So please, again, make sure that you do turn that in to your Pathways Family Specialist. If you have any questions, reach out to them as well as their supervisor or myself, Scott Batson at sbatson@pathway.org, and we will do our best to answer those questions. As we get started, today's topic on human trafficking includes both labor and sex trafficking. The videos we're going to be watching throughout the training is called Be the One, and it's through the Texas Governor's Office. At the conclusion of the training, I will provide the link to that YouTube video if you want to share it with friends, family members, coworkers, or teens that may be in your home that you think this may be beneficial to. So we're going to start with a clip on what human trafficking entails.
Over 20.9 million men, women, and children are victims of human trafficking. But do you know what human trafficking actually is? In a small, sleepy town, people are dreaming. But not everyone's dreams will come true. Human traffickers prey on people's dreams and lure them away for their own benefit. How do they do this? Human trafficking doesn't happen all of a sudden. It's a process. First, traffickers act. This includes recruiting victims, transporting them to the place where they'll be exploited, hiding them from authorities, and receiving victims from other traffickers. So why don't the victims run away or say no? Because traffickers use different means. This includes threatening or forcing victims to do what they want, abducting or deceiving the victims, and abusing power. Sometimes traffickers promise small payments or benefits to get the victim to cooperate. And why are the traffickers doing this? The purpose of trafficking is exploitation. Traffickers take advantage of victims for their own profit or benefit. This is human trafficking. This man's neighbor tells him that he has a great job for him on a very safe construction site and that he'll be paid a lot of money. With more money, he can make his dreams come true. He agrees to take the job. A few days later, the neighbor's friend picks him up and they drive to the construction site. It's a very long way from his home. This man is put to work immediately without any training or protective equipment, without enough to eat or drink, and with very few breaks. After many months, he's only been paid a fraction of what he was promised. He knows he's been tricked, but he doesn't have enough money to get home. This man is a victim of human trafficking. He was recruited by his neighbor and tricked into thinking he was going to work at a safe construction site for fair pay. Instead, he was forced to work long hours in unsafe conditions for almost no money, while others benefited from his exploitation. One day, while looking for jobs online, this woman comes across an opportunity to work in a restaurant in a big city. Her application is successful, and her new employer arranges for her travel there. She is met at the airport and driven to a part of the city that looks nothing like she expected. The car pulls up to a building. The door is shut and locked behind her. She is made to perform sex acts against her will. She is trapped. This woman is a victim of human trafficking. She was transported by a trafficker from the airport to the location of the job. When she arrived at the location and realized it was not the restaurant job she was expecting, the traffickers used force to keep her there. She was then exploited for forced sex work. This 14-year-old boy on school break is approached on the street by a woman who looks trustworthy. She tells him that she needs workers at her factory, and she promises him lots of money. He brings her to meet his parents. They are so happy for him. He'll now be able to save money for school. The woman drives him to the next town. They pull up to an old building. There is someone waiting for him. As he is led inside, the nice lady drives off. The factory isn't anything like she described. There are lots of people working, including many children. He works all day, and after just a few hours of sleep, he starts again. He is sad. This isn't what he expected. He misses his family. After weeks, he still hasn't received any salary or been allowed to contact them. He is trapped. This boy is a victim of human trafficking. He was tricked by the woman who recruited him on the street. He was then received by a trafficker when he arrived at the factory and exploited by being forced to sew clothing. For anyone under the age of 18, only the act and purpose matter for it to legally be a case of human trafficking. Understanding that human trafficking doesn't happen all at once, but instead is a process of act, means, and purpose, helps us better identify victims and trafficking trends. People everywhere are dreaming and looking for opportunities to make those dreams come true. Human trafficking is happening all around us. Will you recognize it when you see it? To learn more, visit iomx.org.
Okay, so that was a good little video to kind of introduce you to what the differences are of human trafficking versus, labor trafficking versus sex trafficking, which all entail human trafficking. Here's our definition of what human trafficking is. Human trafficking involving the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain some type of labor or commercial sex act. Every year, millions of men, women, and children are trafficked worldwide, including right here in the United States. It can happen in any community, and victims can be any age, race, gender, or nationality. Traffickers may use violence, manipulation, or false promises of well-paying jobs or romantic relationships to lure victims into trafficking populations or situations. So if you're looking, I believe that's answer number 1 on your test, is the definition there of what human trafficking is. With human trafficking, there are language barriers. Fear of the traffickers or fear of the law enforcement frequently keep the victims from seeking help, making human trafficking a hidden crime. Traffickers use force, fraud, or coercion. We're going to see that a lot in our definitions of labor and sex trafficking and human trafficking is force, fraud, and coercion to lure their victims and force them into labor or commercial sexual exploitation. They look for people who are susceptible for a variety of reasons, including psychological or emotional vulnerability, economic hardship, lack of social safety net, natural disasters, or political instability. The trauma caused by the traffickers can be so great that many may not identify themselves as victims or even ask for help, even in highly public settings. And here's our next video. Again, this is going to be from the Be the One video with the Texas Governor's Office.
I'm 22. I was 13 at the time. Until this day, in ways, it still affects me. Before it happened to me, I knew it happened, but I never knew that it would happen to me.
We start tonight with a human trafficking concern right here in Odessa.
An Amarillo man is jailed in Wichita County after a human trafficking operation conducted by law enforcement agencies in West Texas.
It's constantly moving throughout the country, even here in El Paso.
We're not just talking about forced prostitution, but forced labor.
Human trafficking knows no race, knows no gender, knows no ethnicity.
And it doesn't matter where you're from, whether you're an adult, whether you're a child.
I'm here to tell you it happens everywhere. It happens in the smallest of towns. It happens in the largest of cities.
It's not a Madisonville thing, but if it can happen here, it can happen anywhere.
Human trafficking is essentially the debasement of humanity. It is humanity at our worst.
It's happening in your backyard and right next door to you, and you cannot ignore it. Somebody's life depends on you.
first trafficking case that was tried in San Antonio, Texas, involved a 13-year-old child. Human trafficking was not a word that anyone in San Antonio knew, but they learned about it through her testimony.
It actually started like any other day. Like, I woke up, a friend called me, can you go with me over here? Something that I do every day, like people I hang around with every day. And I went. We were actually there to buy drugs. I remember walking in, talking, and I asked if I could use the bathroom. I remember using the bathroom, and when I tried getting out, I couldn't. I tried opening the door, like messing with the lock, and it wouldn't open. It was a weird looking door. Well, it had a lock on the outside. I heard them tell my friend that I had already left. So she ended up leaving. And I remember them coming to the restroom and opening the door. And just right there, I guess something snapped in my head what was going on. So I tried to run and like fight and kick, but I was too small. It was two grown men.
It's just that girl. She's that type of kid. Well, what is that exactly? She's somebody's baby. She's somebody's daughter. They're somebody's son. And they matter. All of them matter. And nobody should exploit people at their lowest point.
Human trafficking is modern-day slavery. It is the exploitation of men, women, and children by third parties for their own profit or gain.
This is a problem, a social problem, and a crime that needs all of us to play our part.
So that's kind of a little brief glimpse of what understanding some of the human trafficking is. Like we said, it can be categorized as labor trafficking, sex trafficking, or it can be a combination of the two. Two things can be happening simultaneously at the same time. The victims, like they were saying in the video, the victims could be men, women, and children. They could be individuals, families, or even groups of people. They can be diverse in race, class, religion, or culture. They can be youth running away from unstable family environments, homeless youth, and youth with a history of physical or sexual abuse. Trafficking can occur anywhere in our cities and our towns. Doesn't matter how big or how small they are, it can happen anywhere. In our nicest neighborhoods and subdivisions and around our towns that we live in, within the schools that our children attend, foster or group homes, shelters where children are placed temporarily, malls or parks, places where children and families congregate, online social networking. A victim can be trafficked without ever even leaving their home or community. Some industries that we may see with labor trafficking can include agriculture, manual labor, or landscaping, construction, domestic servitude, restaurants or food service, factories, paddling or begging, sales crews, hospitality and tourist industry, nail salons, carnivals, and gas stations. Many times this could be happening right in front of us without us even realizing it. Industries that we may see with sex trafficking cases can include commercial and sex prostitution, residential brothels, massage parlors, internet-based commercial sex, escort services, truck stops, pornography, fake modeling agencies, restaurants, and bars. Here's going to be our next clip. I will warn you, I believe this clip is kind of hard to watch. It's a rough story to listen to, but it's one that I think helps us to have more compassion, empathy, and understanding of the awareness of human trafficking.
Smuggling and trafficking are two entirely different crimes. Smuggling or illegal entry is a crime against the border of a nation or against the sovereignty of a nation. Human trafficking, on the other hand, is a crime against a human being. Smuggling or illegal entry requires movement. You don't have to be transported to be trafficked. You can be trafficked in your own home.
So actually, that was not the right video that I was thinking of. It's the next video that's pretty hard to listen to. But that one gave you an overview of what the difference is between smuggling versus trafficking. So like she was saying, with trafficking, it's a crime against a person. It can contain an element of coercion, exploitation, and forced labor. And then the persons are seen as victims. Whereas smuggling is a crime against a country. There is no coercion there. It involves entry into the country, and the person is seen and prosecuted as a criminal. So it's kind of the difference there between trafficking versus smuggling. So who are the traffickers? On a large scale operation, this could be a sophisticated national or international crime network. They can be highly organized from the recruitment, transportation, and exploitation stages of human trafficking, often well connected financially and politically in the country of origin. On a medium scale, we see more often specialize in a particular source or destination country. They may include pimps, brothel owners, farm owners, and salon owners. On a small scale, we may focus on recruiting a particular victim. And that could even include a relative, friend, neighbor, boyfriend, or girlfriend, much like the story we were seeing with the girl that went into the home with her friend to buy drugs, and the girl left, and then that happened through that situation. So the economics of human trafficking, there's kind of two primary factors that drive human traffickers, and that's high profits and low risk for that trafficker. Annual illegal profits worldwide from human trafficking are estimated at $150 billion. So there is a lot of profit to be made for these human traffickers. In Texas, in recent reports from the National Human Traffic Resource Center, Texas was the second to California, and the number of calls to the hotline reporting a tip or requiring assistance. Texas is consistently in the top tier of the states in both number of calls to the hotline and potential cases, along with states such as California and Florida. And we think about that, and those countries are border states. Texas and California border Mexico, where they can come through a land border, but California, Texas, and Florida also have water borders. So it is easy for entry into our country and not necessarily be caught. New York and Ohio are also in the top 5. Again, they are closer to those border states from Canada and to the country. A snapshot of some human trafficking in Texas. This is some stories that have been told, reports from across the state. In that very first video, or the second video, I'm sorry, there was a lady saying Madisonville is not just one place that this had happened. And so you can see there's the bubble talking about Madisonville. A woman was convicted for sex trafficking and compelling prostitution, including at least one of those being a child. The woman provided the victims with a place to live, and then she made them engage in prostitution, which they then gave her the money. So, these can happen in the smallest of towns as well as the largest of cities. Some of the elements of traffickers, and we saw this in the first video where it was talking about the means and the act. So the elements of sex trafficking, when we look at the action can be transporting, enticing, recruiting, harboring, providing, obtaining, or maintaining. And that means, as we're always going to see, is force, fraud, and coercion. With labor trafficking, under the Texas law, labor trafficking occurs when a person knowingly traffics another person utilizing force, fraud, or coercion in cases involving children with the intent that the trafficked person engage in forced labor services. Again, they broke it down there, the traffickers, the force, fraud, coercion, and those elements that we will see within the labor trafficking. Now with sex trafficking, our definition is a little bit different here. Under the Texas law, sex trafficking occurs when a person knowingly traffics another utilizing force, fraud, or coercion in cases involving adults with the intent that the trafficked person engage in commercial sex acts. So that's the difference between labor trafficking versus sex trafficking. Now, with the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000, it defines severe forms of trafficking in persons as the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for one of two things. One would be for the labor or services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of subjection to involuntary servitude, peonage, debt bondage, or slavery. And then our second one is going to be for the purpose of a commercial sex act in which the sex act is induced to perform such act has not attained 18 years of age. So our children or minors. The Texas Family Code, which is the law that our civil law in which we follow as a foster or adoptive parent, you're probably familiar with the Texas Family Code because this is the law in which CPS is held accountable to when we go to court. So with the Texas Family Code, they did specifically include human trafficking as a form of child abuse. Cases involving abuse or neglect at the hands of traditional caregivers may be investigated by CPS, Children's Protective Services, or DFPS, the Department of Family and Protective Services. Same thing there. So that would be traditional, where we hear of sexual abuse allegations, CPS is going to go out and investigate that. All other cases are going to be handled by a law enforcement agency such as the Police Department, Sheriff's Department, Texas Rangers, FBI, or Homeland Security. So when it becomes human trafficking as labor or sex trafficking, that is not going to be investigated by CPS. That is going to be referred to local law enforcement. If that was called into the state hotline to Child Protective Services for investigation, and they determine it is human trafficking, they're going to send that report over to that local law enforcement agency for the criminal investigation. CPS will not follow through with that. So here's the video that I was kind of describing that is a little bit harder to listen to. Very sad situation.
They took me out the restroom. And I remember just being so scared because I didn't know what was going to happen. I fought, I kicked, I screamed. It's like nobody heard me. They tied me up to the bed. And they just took turns raping me. For the first couple of days, it was just them two. And then after that, they would be at the door, and other guys that would come to buy drugs, they would tell them, pay me, and you could basically rape her. And I remember I would kick and scream, but I really couldn't do nothing because I was tied up. And after that, it was like day in, day out, all like different guys would just come in and rape me. And I remember when I guess they got tired of me fighting and kicking, even though I couldn't really, it wasn't doing nothing. They started shooting me up with drugs. And at that point, I guess after so much of it, I couldn't fight no more. I remember them threatening me with a knife, telling me they would kill me. And I remember at one point, I told him, just do it. Because I had already given up hope of me getting out. Even though after them shooting me up with so much drugs and me not being able to feel it, I knew it was happening.
So like I said, that one was a rough one to kind of listen to. So when we look at child abuse, among the diverse populations affected by human trafficking, children are at particular risk to sex trafficking and labor trafficking. Some signs of sex trafficking that we need to be aware of, not only as parents, but as people that work with children in the capacity of school teachers, Sunday school teachers, vacation Bible school, swimming lessons, Little League baseball coaches. We need to make sure that we're watching for these signs and protecting kids to the best of our ability. They often go missing. They could be secretive about where they've been, who they've been with, have unexplained money or presence, experimenting with drugs or alcohol, associates with being groomed by older adults, wanting to hang out with them and getting out of cars with unknown adults and not telling us who that person was, children that are in relationships with significantly older people, following or showing evidence of sexual assault. If we see that, we need to be aware and how to report it. Thousands of children in the US are at risk of trafficking. 79,000 children are currently being trafficked in Texas, according to a study performed by the University of Texas. Average age of a child is recruited or forced into prostitution is between the ages of 11 to 14 years old, just like the girl in that story we heard. By understanding the dynamics of child trafficking, you can be better able to identify suspected instances of human trafficking and report it as required. Last year, or we said currently in Texas, there's 79,000 minors and youth that are victims of trafficking. There's also approximately 234,000 workers that are victims of labor trafficking as well, with a combined total of 313,000 victims of human trafficking in Texas. Traffickers exploit approximately 600 million from those victims of trafficking just in Texas alone. Minors and youth sex trafficking cost the state of Texas $6.6 billion on finding missing children, recovering them from those operations, all of the efforts that go into that prosecution. That is all the money that Texas is spending in child sex trafficking. Traffickers show little regard for a child's health or well-being. When a child enters into sex trafficking or labor trafficking, the average lifespan of that child is up to 2 years from the time they entered. A lot of times they die because of medical neglect, severe malnourishment. Their needs are not being provided for. So our children may be subjected to inhumane conditions. They work long hours for little or no pay. They live where they work, usually in very poor conditions like warehouses and sleeping in a corner on concrete. They're subjected to verbal, physical, and sexual assault. They lack basic necessities and have no access to medical care. Many times, like the girl was saying in the story, they will get them strung out on drugs so that they will not fight. They don't battle back against the person that is possibly sex trafficked, that is having the sex act with them. And that's when we see the medical neglect and the substance abuse kind of happens. For $20, you can usually get a condom and a paper towel. And these children will be subjected to anywhere from 5 to 20 rapes an evening. Sex traffickers are constantly moving because they don't want to be caught. In Texas, there was a child that was obtained into sex trafficking in Bastrop, Texas. 4 months later, they found her all the way in Michigan. They continued to traffic her all the way up into Michigan so that they could not be caught. Child labor trafficking. It can occur in such settings as fields where they're harvesting crops, domestic households. This may be a little bit harder for them to catch because they're not seen if it's domestic servitude. Restaurants and bars, and these aren't going to be our restaurants that we go to that are like chain restaurants like Chili's and Chick-fil-A and places like that. It's going to be the more standalone places. probably not the best restaurant we've ever been to. Motels and hotels, traveling in sales crews. This is where we may see them traveling with in concerts, with circuses or carnivals, those entertainment venues. Whenever we go on vacation, let's say we go out to LA and we're walking down the Hollywood Walk of Stars, and those are the people that are usually trying to sell different tours and those types of things. That's where we may see some of the labor trafficking happen. With sex trafficking, it can occur through online advertisements of children for sex. If you're aware, there's been several lawsuits where they finally, through Craigslist, this was happening a lot. Finally won cases against them where Craigslist no longer has those personal classifieds on there. There's a web page called Backpage where it continues to still happen. Children work in sexually oriented businesses, producing, buying, selling, or trading child pornography, buying, selling, or trading of children for sexual exploitation or for anything of value. And that could be where someone is saying, you can stay in my house for sex acts. But they get to stay there for quote unquote free is the way they sell it to the child. And then that is considered child sex trafficking. It's that exchange there of anything of value. Fake child modeling agencies and children engaging in sex acts to acquire food, clothing, or shelter. The children that are at risk, the traffickers prey upon children because they're easier to manipulate and deceive. They often target children with vulnerabilities, including lack of family support, significant familial and school disruptions, parental alcohol and substance abuse, exposure to domestic violence, physical and sexual abuse histories, lack of supervision or basic care. What does that sound like? A lot of times that is the foster children we are working with in the foster care system. That is the environments from which they were removed. So children can be targeted. Specifically, our children in foster care are at 13 times greater risk of being human trafficked than a child in a nurturing home environment. Our traffickers are targeting schools. Traffickers may use your school as a place to recruit victims. Students can recruit other students. What is happening are pimps are placing Johns, which are 15, 16, 17-year-old children, it could be boys or girls, into a school setting. And when they go in, they're targeting children with low self-esteem, low self-worth, the children that are sitting by themselves in the school, in the lunchroom, they're being picked on in the hallways. That student then targets that child because they have that vulnerability. They have them, they tell them everything they want to hear. They try to coerce that child into falling in love with them. And then we have what is called a trauma bond. And in that situation, they can then coerce that child to run away, come be with me, let's go live life together. Once they run away, then that child enters the human trafficking arena. Adults may recruit on or near the campus. Traffickers may text or contact students in school, and traffickers may use positions of authority to contact and recruit children as well. Each year, nearly 5 million children attend Texas public schools and charter schools. These children are all targets. Children may attend school while being trafficked. At school, they are outside of the trafficker's presence and provides an opportunity to identify and report. There is more training going into schools and their in-service trainings to help teachers identify trafficking and how to report it. So educators are being trained to look for potentially dangerous behavior, changes in the child's behavior and emotional state, and any signs of abuse or neglect. Trafficking indicators that we need to be cognizant of. In sex trafficking, we want to look for social media usage or internet browsing history related to sexual advertising. If that child was to leave a classroom and that school computer, and when the teacher gets on it, that would be where they may find that internet browsing on there. As a parent, you may look at on their phone, a tablet, or even gaming devices like PlayStation has the ability to get on the internet. Peer conversations about older boyfriends or girlfriends, rumors about someone offering a place where youth can live or party, comments about leaving to meet someone that they met online, and the use of street language. And I'll actually show you a PowerPoint towards the end with some of the different street language or sex trafficking lingo to be aware of. Labor or sex trafficking, in labor trafficking, we could look for truancy or frequent tardiness, frequent changes in school, declining grades, tiredness throughout the daytime, falling asleep in class, changes in usual activities or friends, changes in hobbies, demeanor, or economic circumstances. So we've got to recognize that exploitation. We got to recognize that all children are at risk of exploitation. There's no such thing as a good kid or bad kid when it comes to exploitation. A lot of times our good kids are the ones that are more vulnerable because they follow the rules. They respect authority, and they're going to be more compliant in listening to an adult. So I will tell you a story here locally in the Houston area. There was a child in a very affluent neighborhood that was online and talking to someone she thought was another younger child, a boy, and he got her to send a picture of her breast. And then once she sent the picture, he wrote her back and said, if you tell anybody about this, I'm sending this picture to all of your friends at school. I have their phone numbers. I'm telling your parents. And so coercion happened there. And then they started having her doing more acts at home, more taking off her shirt and sexual acts in front of the computer. Her mom and dad were in the home while this was happening in her bedroom, never knew that their child was being exploited out of her own home. So we need to recognize that traffickers, recruiters, and victims cross ethnic, racial, gender, socioeconomic, and age lines. They are recognizing that traffickers brutalize the children that they traffic. So it's important that we report what we observe. When we understand these risk factors, some things that we're going to look for are some individual characteristics or experiences. And foster care is where we may see this happen because our children are more vulnerable. They've had those disruptions in their home environments. They've been exposed to different types of abuse, neglect, drugs, alcoholism, mental health within the family. And they're looking for that acceptance, for that love from someone. History of child abuse, neglect and exploitation, a history of running away, disabilities, homeless, truancy, delinquency, substance abuse, distrust of authority. They're scared to say what is happening to them to law enforcement because of their distrust of authority. But not only law enforcement, a teacher is a person of authority. So they're scared to tell other adults of what's happening in their life. And a new unfamiliar country or location, the stigma and discrimination that can go with that. Mental illness and mental health of the child, low self-esteem, poverty or limited resources, language barriers, adolescent development. So, and relationships that we may look for, relationship factors, family conflict, disruption or dysfunction, peer pressure to engage in risky behaviors, lack of long-term connections or a sense of belonging. Why do children join gangs? They have no sense of belonging. When these children are desperate for attention and love and nurture, these are the people they seek it out from. Self-esteem is not supported. And healthy social relationships, social isolation, family and friends living elsewhere, and gang affiliation. That's the relationships factor. Now, in looking at the community as a whole, there may be reluctance to believe trafficking occurs in my community. Families that live in affluent neighborhoods, subdivisions, thinking that it's protected. Everybody that lives here is educated and professionally employed, and we have the model family. It can happen anywhere, to the best of families, to the most wealthy to the most poverty-stricken of families. No dedicated resources to identify victims or provide services. There's gang presence. No clear understanding of human trafficking. That's why we've got to educate our communities. Limited community resources to at-risk populations, and lack of school resources to provide prevention or referral programs. Now, and then lastly, our societal factors. What do we see in society with those factors? Biases against human trafficking. And when we say bias, what we mean here is prostitution. If a person is arrested for prostitution, it's not that they were willingly out prostituting themselves. They were being forced, coerced to do so. It's human trafficking. We're seeing a change in law enforcement that if they are a recovering person that is being trafficked in regards to prostitution, they're not charging them with prostitution. They're getting them the help they need and getting them to a place of recovery. Prevalence of sexual violence, glamorization of the pimp culture, apathy towards homeless and runaway youth. They deserve it. They ran away from home. They don't want to be helped. Not necessarily the case. Stigmas against prostitution, racism or racial inequality. Children view as property and a commodity, and social norms. So those are those things that we may see with those factors. Again, here's another clip with Be the One.
I was an assistant principal at the time, and my job was to ensure, first and foremost, the safety of students. My relationship with Kay was one that was quite unique. This was a student that was very independent, was very bubbly, very energetic. She never got in trouble at school. There were never any issues at school. Great attendance, great grades. Things began to take a turn in a negative way she started to let her grades slip. There were increased absences. Then that turned into flat out absenteeism. She was quiet when I did see her. She was nervous. Her physical appearance had changed drastically. I asked her, "Who's hurting you?" She told me, "You will never know. I promise you, Miss Yamaguchi, you will never find out who's hurting me."
What the text said was you need to contact these administrators in reference to a young girl who's possibly being pimped out in Pleasanton and Stockdale. It's a high school, beautiful campus, probably upper middle class to middle class kiddos that go there.
Then one day she came in, and we were working at that point with the detectives at the time, so I was able to stall her, and then that's when the vehicle was searched and the father's phone was found.
It was her father. He had been recently released from prison, so she didn't know her father. She yearned for the love of her dad, and he came out and he exploited that. That's a tough weapon to defeat, is love, caring, all the emotions. And now you're gaining that from your trafficker. Why would you want to see that go away? You wouldn't, so you protect them. You protect them. And that's why it's tough for us as law enforcement to beat down those walls, to find the victims. They don't self-identify. So it's the others, like the administrators at Steele, that saw the signs. And they knew something wasn't right. And somebody needed to look into it, because that kid is worth it. Every kid is worth it. They don't get to pick what cards are dealt to them. And you have people that are bad that exploit that. They see the hands that are dealt. It's almost like they can be mind readers, and they can pick out these kids. So you have got to be the one and continue to break through the walls. And when you're not getting the right response, you got to keep making another phone call, as Ruth Yamaguchi did. Ruth Yamaguchi, she's the reason. She's the reason why Kay's father is doing life in prison, and that young girl was saved. There's no telling how many kids she saved.
In today's world, teaching kids internet safety is just something we have to do. We all need to care about this issue because all of the children in our lives are at risk.
I think you know that we brought everyone together today to talk about human trafficking.
How old were you guys when you guys got your first phone?
10.
12, probably.
I was 12.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen like 7-year-olds with iPhones.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm. So how many of you, just out of curiosity, have any kind of parental restriction on your phone at all? One.
What kind of restriction? Now I feel like the loser.
Your parent would disagree. Yes. So what kind of restrictions? What can't you do?
Well, they have like a cutoff time for me at night. So when it's past 10 o'clock, I have to turn my phone. I can't take it with me to bed. I have to leave it out charging by my door in like the living room.
It's very typical for teenagers to get upset with their parents because there's some rule or something that they don't agree with. So you have, you know, a stranger on the outside who's giving you a promise of something better. So you can come live with me. There will be no rules. You can have your phone 24/7. We can travel. And so that's very alluring to children who are searching for some acceptance from some adult.
I'm guessing maybe most of you, if not all of you, have Snapchat or Instagram or something along those lines.
What do you use the most? What's your favorite?
Instagram. Twitter.
The tools of a trafficker on the internet are too many to list. Any social media site, chat rooms, any number of forums.
We live in a society where exploiters can access our kids not only in the malls and in youth shelters, but also in social media apps, in interactive games that they are constantly playing online. And so it's become much more efficient for traffickers and exploiters to access kids that way.
Me and my friend made this group chat on this messaging app, and it's like an open group chat, so if anyone looks up the tag for it, they can just join it. And then people just started like adding themselves to it and coming into it. From their profile picture, these are like grown men. These are not high schoolers. They'll contact me or they'll message me because they can see my account, and they'll be like, hey, what's up?
And your profile picture is you.
Yes.
So they know that you are not an adult.
Yes.
Woman. Yeah.
Yes.
And they're looking for kids who are spending a lot of time on the social media apps, who are maybe sharing a little too much, who seem to be reaching out for someone to pay attention to them. They can tell that the parents aren't really watching, aren't really monitoring what they're doing online.
The people that are trying to lure young people aren't out there showing the ugly side of themselves, the predator sides of themselves. They're showing young people exactly what they want them to see. They're grooming them. They're looking for opportunity to maybe get them away from the adults in their life.
So in 7th grade, when I was obsessed with being famous, some guy DM'd me asking me if I wanted to become a star. And I was like, oh, yeah, me being the naive little 7th grader. I was like, oh, yes, totally, you know. He wants information, his address, and everything. So she was my mom. She was like, oh my God, block him. So we did. The next day, he made another account and then DM'd me again.
I would say traffickers cast a wide net. They'll send lots of friend requests, lots of follow requests, make lots of comments. They'll cast their net wide, and all they need is one. And whether it's general conversation over a couple hours, a few weeks, a few months, each victim is different. It's so common nowadays for teens and kids to build relationships online, whether they think they know that person or that person seems to have something in common with some of their interest or another friend. And so they allow that person into their social media world, whether it's on Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, you name it, any of those. And they think they're talking to someone that they don't really know.
My phone's at 1%, but I actually have someone right now who's trying to follow me and I don't know who they are, and it's been pending for like weeks, and I'm still trying to figure out who it is.
When I talk to parents about the internet, I usually start by talking about some scary person who comes to your front door, knocks on it, and asks to talk to your 12-year-old child. You would look at them, slam the door on their face, and probably call the police. But unfortunately, that same person has access to your 12-year-old son as he's on his PlayStation playing his video games with complete and total strangers that you've never met.
I would tell parents that it's imperative that they know what their kids are doing. If you're going to provide your child, your teen, with access to the internet, whether it's a tablet, a cell phone, a computer, it's imperative that you as the parent or the guardian or the influential person in that child's life to know what they're doing and who they're interacting with.
What are some of the apps that kids hide from their parents?
Snapchat.
I think Snapchat is
Snapchat.
Number one, probably. Like on my phone, because I have an Android, you can hide apps. Like if you go to your menu and then you tap on like the dots in the corner, you can hide apps, and unless you actually click show hidden apps, like you can't see them anywhere on your phone.
They've got to have adults, whether it's a trusted teacher or a counselor or a parent, who they can come to and say, hey, this is what's going on. What do I do about it?
So those are some very good things to be aware of. We're going to talk about a couple of those here in just a minute, the apps and things, and monitoring the child's social media presence. So when we say a person targets the most vulnerable, we talked about earlier some of the things that they look for, and those things of like being a child in foster care, a child who's homeless, and a child who has past experiences of physical or sexual abuse. So individually, those are one thing, but when we start combining them together, when those circles overlap, we start seeing a very vulnerable child there to be susceptible to human trafficking. And again, here are some statistics. These are 10 years old now. I've tried to look up to see if there were some more recent statistics. I couldn't find any. This was through the Texas Education Agency that they provided that information. So those recruitment opportunities, like we were just hearing, on the internet, social media networks, gaming, or other electronic devices with internet capabilities, texting apps, computer, tablets, and laptops, and smartphones and cell phones. Places that they may target, again, where do families and children go? School campuses, foster homes, shelters, residential facilities. There's allegations of facilities in Texas where employees that are working in those residential facilities have been human trafficking children out of those facilities. So we've got to protect. Bus stops, shopping centers, parks and playgrounds, just on the street in general, as kids are walking home from school. Concerts, sports, and public events, restaurants, and juvenile detention. So we've got to make sure we're monitoring our kids and who they're coming into contact with. When we talk about technology, it has facilitated the exploitation of children. Technology can be used to reach children anywhere, anytime, and the traffickers use it to their advantage. 10 years old, that is the average age a child receives a smartphone. At 12 is the average age kids are on a social media app like Instagram or Snapchat. A lot of kids aren't on Facebook nowadays. Facebook is for old people, but Snapchat is a big one amongst kids, as well as TikTok. A poll also showed 32% of parents of kids ages 7 to 9 years old reported their kids using a social media app. 11 years old is the average age of kids who are exposed to pornography. And then as early as 8 years old, more than 1 in 10 kids with smartphones will become exposed to sexting. By 13, more than a third of children who have a smartphone will be exposed as well. So you've got to monitor their social media apps. There are apps out there to help you to monitor their phones and tablets and whatnot. There's apps called Circle by Disney, Guardian, Net Nanny, Mama Bear, Bark. There's several out there. Norton, I believe, Norton Family. If you could do a simple Google search, you can find those apps that connect you to their devices. Like the girl was saying, on the Android phone, you can hide icons. So we could look at their phone and say, okay, they don't have Snapchat. Kids can download it, play on it all day, delete it before they enter the home. Now you're checking their phone, it's not on there, but then when they leave the next day, they download it again. So by using those apps, you can monitor and track what's going on with their phone and making sure they're not having contact with people that they shouldn't. The National Human Trafficking Hotline has recorded recruitment in all types of sex and labor trafficking on social media platforms, including but not limited to Facebook, Instagram, Snap, Chat, Kick, and MeetMe. Those are both texting apps. WhatsApp, dating sites like Tinder, Grindr, and Plenty of Fish. So there's some there that you can definitely see. The one in the bottom middle looks like a calculator icon, but it actually, you have to type in a code. It functions as a calculator, but when you type in a code, it actually unlocks, and kids can hide their apps in within that app, as well as pictures, text messages, and things of that nature. So you may want to look for that icon. Some emoji guides. This one's kind of probably hard for you to see. It's pretty small, but it tells you common drug-related emojis or gang emergencies, sex trafficking. Like I said, this is small, but if you go onto the Department of Public Safety, Texas Department of Public Safety, this is where this emoji graph came from. I tried to make it a little larger, but the larger that I tried to make it, it started becoming more grainy and you couldn't see the words. And so, but definitely try to look that up, and that way you're aware of, if you're reading a child's text messages, what they could be talking about. Technology allows traffickers to more easily make contact and stalk victims. Like the lady was saying, instead of knocking on your door, they're going to their DMs, their direct messages. They groom, recruit, and control their victims, employ sexting and sextortion tactics, advertise and market victims, connect with potential buyers and complete transactions. They maintain anonymity. I can never say that word. Be anonymous. Distance the trafficker from the crime. Children from an abusive home life may fall prey to false love and affection provided by that trafficker. Like the man was saying, the girl's daughter, the girl's father got out of jail and she never got to know him, and she wanted that love and affection. She wanted that acceptance from him. And he took advantage of that and exploited it into trafficking. Children who are impoverished may believe in the trafficker's promise of a better life. Children who have run away or are living on the street may be taken in by traffickers who provide food and shelter. Children using online social networks may be lured by the trafficker as they make friendships. Again, I think this is the last video that we'll be showing you today.
I talk to a lot of parents who think, oh, this happens only to kids in those neighborhoods or kids who are in foster care. And actually, no, it doesn't.
All children are at risk for human trafficking, but there are certain risk factors that heighten that risk. Kids that are truant, kids that are homeless, kids that have been turned out or have run away from their homes, kids with learning disabilities, mental disabilities, physical disabilities, kids with addictions. The key that makes children most at risk for trafficking is accessibility. If the trafficker can access you away from the people that are supposed to protect you.
So that one, again, is just kind of re-summarizing, making sure that we're protecting and reporting. Some tactics that a trafficker may use is providing false feelings of love and affection, create a dependency on drugs and alcohol, like the girl in one of the first videos we watched. They forced her to utilize drugs until she had an addiction. Isolate the victim from others, physically, sexually, or verbally abuse the victim, control access to food or shelter, place the victim in debt, exhaust the victims with long work hours and quotas, threaten family, friends, and other victims, and convince the child that engaging in commercial sex or other forced labor is better than the life that they have at home. So why is it so difficult to identify these victims? A lot of them, they may not be looking to be rescued. They're being trafficked, and they may not like the trafficking act itself, but they have food and shelter, and they're receiving personal items. A lot of these children that become trafficked, they don't get to keep the money, and it may not be prostitution. It may be dancing, exposing themselves online. It could be dancing in a strip club, those types of things. The trafficker takes the money, but in turn, they will buy them high-end purses, nails, hair, whatever it is that that child views as something of importance to them. And so when that child is recovered by law enforcement and they go home or back into a foster home setting, that child will run away on average up to 17 times to go back to their trafficker. It is an invisible trauma bond that they have to them. They have an unhealthy connection that they view as love. A friend of mine is over a shelter, a residential facility for girls that have been sexually trafficked. There was a trafficking ring out of Chicago that found out about this residential facility, which is not listed. It's in the woods. It's hard to find. They don't have a website, or it's not advertised. But they placed a girl from that sex trafficking ring out of Chicago into that facility, and she recruited 6 of the girls to run away with her to go back into the trafficking lifestyle. They may be misidentified by social service agencies, mislabeled as criminals instead of victims. Traffickers train victims to tell lies and false stories. Victims are trained to distrust authority. If they are picked up by law enforcement, they're too scared to talk. Like the little girl telling her teacher, Miss Yamaguchi, "You will never know who's hurting me," because of that distrust of authority. Victims may be running away from something far worse at home, and traffickers maintain a physical and psychological hold over them. I lied. Here is another video. A very short one.
How can you be the one? Pay attention to the people in your community, your surroundings, and report red flag behaviors. Do not wait to call. Make your report timely. Those moments matter. Don't approach traffickers yourself. That can place you, the victim, and any future prosecution in danger. If the conduct you have observed is an emergency, call 911 and tell them you believe you have observed human trafficking. Don't worry about being wrong. Your call may be the one that saves a life. If it's not an emergency or you need to remain anonymous, call the National Human Trafficking Hotline at 1-888-3737-888. Provide actionable information, descriptions of cars, descriptions of people, when and where you saw the conduct, and take a picture if you can safely do so. Those details make a difference.
Okay, so why don't victims ask for help? Like we were saying, there is that trauma bond to that trafficker. They have limited family or social support. They have nobody to call, nobody to go to. They fall victim to those false promises of love, security, and a better future, feeling that nobody will understand. Even if I do disclose it, is somebody going to believe me? Confined or monitored, shame, self-blame, hopelessness, and resignation. Some red flags to be aware of when it comes to sex trafficking: unexplained injuries, branding or tattoos. And I'll show you a couple of common ones. Hotel keys, rolls of cash, multiple phones, and a refillable gift card. Sexually provocative clothing inappropriate for weather or the situation. Unable to make decisions without approval from someone else. Claim of older adult boyfriend or girlfriends. And here's some of those tattoos or brandings we're talking about. The crowns or the barcodes, is something that we may look for on the neck, groin, or arm is where we would see those. And that's claiming that property of who they belong to. Some human trafficking lingo that I was saying we kind of show you some of these things. Branded is also referred, it's a tattoo on a victim indicating ownership by that trafficker or that pimp. Jump down to pimp. What is the definition of a pimp? It is, or a pimp circle describes a situation where pimps circle around the victim to intimidate and discipline them using verbal or physical threats and actions, beating with a wire coat hanger, defecating and urinating on them. So there's these different things that you may hear a child talking about. Lot lizards, you know, or to the tracks or the blade, that's the street that they're working on. So that's definitely things to kind of think about there. Again, by Googling these things, you can see more and more common updated terminology that's being used so that you stay up to date with that. Texas is a mandated reporting state. Under Texas law, all individuals are required to report suspected abuse or neglect. Certain professions, including teachers and nurses, are required to report suspected abuse or neglect within 48 hours. As foster parents, we have different timeframes and employees that we have to follow. Don't delegate your report to another person or supervisor. Make sure you're the one doing it. You want to make sure that it is being taken care of and that you have the firsthand information and that you're reporting that. Reports can be made to local law enforcement or the Department of Family and Protective Services, which is CPS. You can call 911 in order to report that to law enforcement. CPS's hotline, statewide hotline, is 1-800-252-5400, or you can even log on to their website at txabusehotline.org and log in and type out that information and contact information and all. So what do you do if a child makes an outcry? If this is a foster child, you know, there are very specific things we have to follow. Make sure you and the victim are safe. First, you want to remain calm. Assure the child they did the right thing by telling you and that they're not to be blamed for the abuse. Adults are here to take care of children, not hurt them. Do not make promises. If they ask you, promise you won't tell, don't say yes. No, we have to tell CPS. We have to tell, you know, whoever it is to make sure this person doesn't hurt anyone else. Let the child tell their story. Don't interrupt them. They've been waiting to get this off their chest. Allow them to tell their story, but leave the questioning to the professionals. Don't ask questions. Reassure them again, everything they did. This is so brave. I know how hard this was for you to tell me. I'm so happy you trusted me to confide this into me, and I am here to take care of you and make sure you're safe. That's what we want to feed back to them. We don't want to ask questions. We want to leave that to the interviewers with the sexual abuse departments, whether that is through CPS or through law enforcement, the forensic interviewers, to do that questioning. And we want to report to Pathways and the hotline. The licensing regulation for reporting sexual abuse is as soon as you become aware of it. So as soon as that child discloses and we've wrapped up with them, immediately you need to report that to Pathways, and we have to call that in to the statewide hotline. And again, that number is 1-800-252-5400. Additional assistance that you may receive is I Watch Texas. This is operated by the Texas Department of Public Safety. The National Human Trafficking Hotline that they gave in the video, 1-888-3737-888. Provide tips or leads on suspected child sexual exploitation crimes to the Cyber Tip Hotline. They have a phone number there and a link, cybertipline.com. So resources for this training. We got a lot of our information from the Texas Education Agency, the Department of Homeland Security, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, Department of Health and Human Services, the Texas Governor's Office, and then the videos that we've watched today are Be the One. If you go on to YouTube and search for it, it is Be the One video through the Texas Governor's Office. So thanks for joining. Make sure if you are a Pathways foster adoptive parent that you do complete that test and turn it into your Pathways family specialist. If you're an employee, make sure that you're going on to Relias and taking the test there. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. My email is sbatson@pathway.org. Thanks for joining, and we'll catch you on the next quarterly training.